I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural. To me, the world was black and white, ruled by logic, a reason. That all changed last autumn when I moved into the old house on Maple Street. I was fresh out of college, eager to start my new job as a reporter in the quiet town of Ravenwood. The house was a steel, 2-story Victorian with intricate woodwork and a spacious yard, all for a price that seemed too good to be true. The real estate agent mentioned something about the previous owner wanting a quick sale, but I didn't pay much attention. I was just excited to have my own place. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time unpacking boxes and getting settled into my new routine. The neighbors were friendly enough, though they seemed a bit distant when I mentioned where I lived. I brushed it off as small-town quirks and continued about my business. It was on the 5th night that things started to feel off. I was lying in bed, drifting between consciousness and sleep, when I heard a faint creaking noise coming from downstairs. It sounded like footsteps slowly pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor of the living room. My heart raced, and I held my breath, straining to listen. Probably just the house settling, I told myself, pulling the covers up to my chin. But the footsteps continued, deliberate and heavy. Gathering my courage, I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bedside and crept downstairs, flipping on lights as I went. The living room was empty. Everything was exactly as I had left it. I checked all the doors and windows. They were locked tight. Feeling a bit foolish, I headed back upstairs, convincing myself it was just my imagination. The next morning, I shrugged off the incident and went to work. As a new reporter, I was eager to make a good impression, so I dove into researching local history for a piece I was writing. In the archives, I stumbled upon a series of articles from the 1950s about a string of disappearances in Ravenwood. Intrigued, I read further. Over the span of a decade, several young women had vanished without a trace. The disappearances all had one common thread. They were last seen near Maple Street. My curiosity piqued. I decided to dig deeper, hoping to uncover a forgotten story that would impress my editor. That night, back at home, I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling the articles had left me with. As darkness fell, the house seemed to grow colder, and the shadows in the corners felt darker and more oppressive. I tried to focus on preparing dinner, but every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to find nothing there when I turned. Around midnight, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps downstairs. This time, they were accompanied by a soft, almost inaudible whispering. My skin prickled, and a chill ran down my spine. Clutching my bat, I tiptoed down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the bottom step, the whispers grew louder, yet I couldn't make out any words. They seemed to be coming from the living room. I flicked on the light, and my blood ran cold. In the middle of the room stood a woman, her back turned to me. She wore a faded, tattered dress, and her long, dark hair cascaded down her back in tangled waves. She was murmuring softly, her voice ethereal and haunting. I froze, unable to move or speak. The air around me grew icy, and my breath came out in visible puffs. Slowly, the woman turned to face me, and I felt a scream clawing its way up my throat. Her face was pale and gaunt, eyes sunken and hollow. Tears of blood streamed down her cheeks, and her lips moved rapidly as she continued to whisper incoherently. She reached out a translucent hand toward me, and I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and crashing to the floor. In an instant, she vanished, leaving nothing but a lingering chill and an overwhelming sense of dread. I scrambled to my feet and bolted out of the house, not stopping until I reached the safety of my car. I spent the rest of the night parked outside, too terrified to go back inside. The next day, exhausted and shaken, I returned to the archives, determined to find answers. I pored over old records, newspapers, and any documents I could find about the disappearances and my house. Finally, I found something that made my blood run cold. In 1958, a woman named Margaret Delaney had lived in my house. She was a recluse, known around town for being strange and withdrawn. Rumors swirled that she practiced dark rituals and communicated with spirits. One night, a mob of townspeople, convinced she was responsible for the disappearances, took matters into their own hands. They stormed her house, dragging her out into the woods behind the property. There, they accused her of witchcraft and murdered her in cold blood, burying her body in an unmarked grave. The disappearances, however, continued for years afterward, and the real culprit was never found. Horrified, I realized that Margaret's restless spirit was still trapped in the house, seeking justice or perhaps revenge. I knew I had to do something. That evening, as dusk settled over Ravenwood, I returned home armed with candles, sage, and a resolve to set things right. I researched cleansing rituals and hoped that acknowledging Margaret's suffering might bring her peace. I lit the candles around the living room and began to burn the sage, reciting a simple prayer I'd found online. The air grew heavy, and a sense of unease settled over me. Suddenly, the flames flickered violently and a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. In the darkness, I heard the whispering again, louder and more frantic than before. Margaret's apparition materialized before me, her eyes filled with pain and sorrow. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you. You didn't deserve it." There, her gaze locked with mine. Then, slowly, a faint smile touched her lips, and her form began to fade, dissolving into a mist that dissipated into the air. The room grew warmer, and the oppressive weight lifted from my chest. I let out a shaky breath, hoping that the ordeal was finally over. Following weeks were quiet. The house felt lighter, almost welcoming. I continued my research and wrote an exposé on Margaret Delaney, telling her true story and the injustice she suffered. The article sparked conversations around town, and a memorial was erected in her honor near the woods where she was killed. One night, as I was settling into bed, I felt a gentle, comforting presence in the room. A soft whisper brushed past my ear, but this time it wasn't frightening. It was a simple, heartfelt, "Thank you." I smiled, knowing that Margaret had finally found peace, and perhaps so had I.